Hello, my name is Maegan Skahill. I'm an English teacher here at Peoria High School, and my TED Talk is about storytelling and how teachers can incorporate storytelling or story teaching into their classrooms. In 2015, the United States Treasury Department announced that an American woman, to be decided upon at a later date, would replace Alexander Hamilton on the $10 bill. I and many other Americans' initial reaction to this news was great. It's about time that a female representative was on currency, and I don't know who Alexander Hamilton is anyways. But the announcement of Hamilton's replacement was made in June, and few could have predicted the cultural phenomenon to hit Broadway 2 months later in August of 2015. Lin-Manuel Miranda's musical Hamilton stunned audiences with the narrative of America's first Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, a man that Miranda claimed embodies hip-hop. For the few of you that have sheltered yourself from the show, here's a short clip from the opening number performed at the White House.
How does a bastard, orphan, son of a whore and a Scotsman, dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean by providence, impoverished and squalor, grow up to be a hero and a scholar?
The $10 founding father without a father got a lot farther by working a lot harder, by being a lot smarter, by being a self-starter. By 14, they placed him in charge of a trading charter.
And every day while slaves were being slaughtered and carted away across the waves, he struggled and kept his guard up. Inside he was longing for something to be a part of. The brother was ready to beg, steal, borrow, or barter.
Then a hurricane came and devastation reigned. Our man saw his future dripping down the drain. Put a pencil to his temple, connected it to his brain, and he wrote his first refrain, a testament to his pain.
Well, the word got around, they said this kid is insane, man. Took up a collection just to send him to the mainland. Get your education, don't forget from whence you came, and the world's gonna know your name. What's your name, man?
Alexander Hamilton. My name is Al.
What Lin-Manuel Miranda did that my history teachers did not do was create a narrative. No longer was Alexander Hamilton bullet points of information I was required to recall for a test. He was a person with ambition, fears, faults, and most admiringly, an unwavering work ethic. Hamilton's story, told through Miranda's masterpiece, is a story that speaks to millions of Americans, and it made the musical the most sought-after ticket in New York and tied for the winningest musical ever. Then in April of 2016, the United States Treasury Department made a second announcement that Harriet Tubman would be the first female to appear on American currency. She was to replace not Alexander Hamilton, but Andrew Jackson on the $20 bill. While there were other factors involved with making the switch, it's impossible to ignore the cultural impact Hamilton the musical had on the decision, an impact that wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for the exquisite storytelling of Lin-Manuel Miranda. Humans love stories. It's because the narrative structure has been woven into the evolution of our brains. Since the beginning, human beings have communicated through storytelling, whether in informal fireside entertainments or through formal preservations of wisdom. Psychology professor Louis Cozzolino said that stories connect families, tribes, and nations, generate culture, and link us to a group mind. These connections, in turn, support the functioning and well-being of each individual brain. It is very likely that our brains have become as complex as they are, precisely because of the power of narratives to guide and organize our thinking. Quite literally, our brains have evolved over time because narratives are so powerful. And it explains why we think in narratives all day long. We make up short stories for almost every action and conversation, even the most mundane, like a future trip to the grocery store. This is because listening to a story stimulates multiple areas of the brain. When the brain receives basic data information, like Alexander Hamilton was the first Treasury Secretary, We process the information as declarative fact-based knowledge. If we are required to memorize it, we use working memory, which uses the frontal lobe. And then if we're lucky, or if the 7th grade teacher is lucky, we will store it in long-term memory. It would likely be mapped in a brain with the 7th grade history class. But this is our least efficient memory process. These memories are not connected to our own understanding in any significant way. However, scientists at Emory University found that when the same information is told as a narrative, it stimulates the same part of the brain that are active when we experience something. When storytellers use figurative language, such as "the towel was like sandpaper," the language areas are stimulated as well as the sensory cortex, or the part of the brain that perceives touch, because we all know the feeling of sandpaper. Scott Schwartz said it best: think of data as seeing a sentence synopsis of a movie, and storytelling is going to see that exact same movie, only in IMAX 3D with those crazy moving seats. This is known as episodic memory, and it's easy to see which information will create a lasting impact. In fact, narratives are at the heart of episodic memory. This form of memory represents our memory of experiences or events that take place in our own life. These memories include the emotional charge and the full context surrounding the event, and are often replayed as film reels in our mind. Semantic memory is structured around information or data, what our teachers throw at us. It keeps a record of facts, meanings, concepts, and knowledge. Semantic memory is shared with others and are independent of personal experience, which is why it requires so much repetition to learn instead of experience memories. While both are forms of long-term memory, semantic memories derive from episodic memories. The facts are retained because of the experience or emotion that's associated with it. When speakers present information through narratives, and ultimately experiences, it's more likely for the information to be retained and stored in long-term memory. This information is especially important for educators whose goal is for students to remember information. In 7th grade, when I was learning about Alexander Hamilton and the other founding fathers of our nation, information was presented to me as data. Hamilton was so-and-so. He was a member of this political party, established this, and died in year whatever. There was no experience attached with this information, which is why in 2015, I could care less if he was taken off the $10 bill. It wasn't until I learned about Alexander Hamilton through Miranda's musical that I connected in a meaningful way with the information of who the founding father was. He was part of the Federalist Party. He created the first national bank, the Coast Guard, and a newspaper now known as the New York Post. He died in 1804 from a gunshot wound acquired in a duel with then Vice President and longtime rival Aaron Burr. And my goal here is not to bore you with all the information I now know about Alexander Hamilton, but to give an example of the application of stories and their relationship with episodic memory. It is not a question of if stories help us learn, but how do we incorporate stories into our learning? And there are plenty of great ways to tell a story. Hollywood created an entire industry over it. But there are 3 easy formats that teachers can use storytelling, or story teaching, into their everyday lessons. They first begin with the why narrative, have multiple short narratives throughout a lesson, and develop a lesson around the narrative. One way to include narratives is to start off with a lesson with one, or a unit with that story. In essence, to start off with the why. One of the most popular TED Talks of all time, Simon Sinek explains how leaders inspire action. These leaders are successful because they're relaying their message. They start with the why. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Starting with the why gives the customer, or the student, a reason to care about the situation as well. A science teacher that starts with a story of a polar bear's hunt for food and the struggle to hunt with no ice to hunt on, who then meets a cruel death from starvation, gives students a clear and reliable understanding of the why to climate change science and research. In math, explaining a story behind why the equation was needed or how the equation came to be would help students create their own experiences with that equation, making it more likely for the skill to reach episodic memory and be better understood and, most importantly, retained. The second method of story teaching is to incorporate small narratives throughout a lesson or unit. If a history class is learning about World War II, using testimony from one soldier would help give context to the important concepts of the war. Museums use this trick frequently. They display photographs of soldiers on the wall and play audios of their letters home and their daily journals. These stories and testimonies make the war experience for those reading. The movie Saving Private Ryan was able to do this for the audience. The experience the filmmakers and the actors created made it so everyone felt the horrors of war while keeping a special interest in Private Ryan. We remember this movie because of the emotions it sparked, and history teachers can do the same with their lessons. Finally, teachers can create their own narratives around the content being taught. Memorizing vocabulary words can be difficult, especially if the vocabulary words are in a different language. By creating a narrative, teachers can incorporate the words and phrases students will use in an experience and engage that student's whole brain. These stories do not need to be elaborate. In fact, the key with this tactic is to keep it simple. The more basic the story, the more likely it will stick with your students. Storytelling is the oldest form of education. While it is important to continually push educational practices forward, we must not forget about the successful practices of the past, especially when one of those practices is the most natural process of human memory. Teaching stories allows students to experience the material for themselves while engaging the whole brain instead of just the areas that process language. Educators and companies supporting education can support this process by making a concerted effort to include narratives in every subject area. Because in 5 years, when you're holding a crisp $10 bill, one that still has Alexander Hamilton's face on it, you'll realize the power one simple story can have. Thank you.